Today I want to talk a little bit about Obsessive-Compulsive Disorder, OCD. Of course, one of the jokes related to this, if you're really OCD, it should read CDO. It's got to be in alphabetical order. But all joking aside, it is a serious disorder that can hamper people's life, and it is characterized by the recurrence of unwanted or distressing thoughts, the need to repeat behaviors or rituals, and it can get to the point where it gets in the way of someone's normal living, from their ability to perform their job or other ordinary functions, and that they begin to realize that these thoughts or these behaviors are not ordinary or normal. They're not reasonable, and they get in the way of daily activity. Usually these characteristics, their typical onset is in childhood or adolescence, as it shows up in, once again, the recurrence of the distressing thoughts or the repetitious behaviors. And usually when we think about this recurrence of unwanted distressing thoughts, one of the things that comes to mind that's fairly common to most people, but in someone with OCD would be all-consuming, would be the idea of, did I leave the iron on? Did I forget to turn off the stove? Are the lights still on? Did I lock the doors? Okay, these are ordinary things that we sometimes forget and think about, and then we go check and we're okay, or we can move on. Someone with OCD, though, has the recurrence of this unwanted questioning over and over and over and over and over again, to the point that they actually can't do anything else but think and worry about, did I lock the door, did I lock the door, did I lock the door? Is the iron off, is the iron off, is the iron off? And they've actually got to repeatedly check, and even after they've checked, the thought is still there and they have to go back and recheck. The thought is still there and they go back and recheck. And it's this distressing situation that causes the most problems. Now, it's not just those ordinary thoughts that we think of that come back repetitiously. Sometimes they include thoughts that are distressing or disturbing because of the nature of the thoughts that repetitiously come up. I might hurt someone, or have I hurt someone physically in some way or another, and it comes up repeatedly. I might hurt someone, or I have hurt someone, or I want to hurt someone. Anyway, it's the repetition of these unwanted, distressing thoughts that are part of the obsessive nature of the disorder. The compulsion comes in under the behavior, the need to repeat behaviors or rituals. This would be the endlessly arranging things in a particular order, obsessing over and consistently feeling a compulsion to put things precisely where they belong. Ritualistic behaviors that have to be repeated before anything can be done further. The constant washing of hands. The constant counting of things. Things that are, once again, seen to be not necessarily reasonable, and they inhibit or interfere with daily activities. So the obsessive thoughts, the compulsive behavior get in the way, and usually treatment for this involves cognitive behavioral therapy and antidepressants to try to get the person to deal with whatever it is that they're stuck on mentally that's compelling or moving them forward into these obsessive thoughts or this compulsive behavior. There is help for those who have this, thankfully. And if you'd like to learn more about OCD and the things we've talked about here just briefly, you will find a link underneath this video. Click on it. It'll take you to a website with more information. And on that website, you'll also find a link to an ebook that's ready for immediate download. Today we want to think a little bit about Bowen family systems, and we're going to be talking about family therapy. Murray Bowen was a psychiatrist and a professor at Georgetown University from the mid to late 1900s, and he was a pioneer in family psychiatry. Among his theories that he developed are this Bowen family systems, when he talked about a family being an integrated unit, both emotionally and intellectually, and integrating on several different levels. Some of his most important characteristics from this family theory include ideas such as triangles. Under this idea, he said that in most relationships, you'll have two people coming together in a relationship, perhaps a mother and a father. If there is conflict or stress between the mother and father in that relationship, they will move to incorporate a third member to deal with the stress. So to give you a couple examples, you might have a situation where a mother and father are experiencing stress in their relationship. The mother may move to the newborn baby, and that will form a new relationship that is stress-free. So the mother will pour all of her attention and time into the child while ignoring the father, the source of the stress or tension. And a new unit is formed. Now, there's a triangle there because the mother and father and the child are all together, but the mother moves towards the less stressful situation with the child and away from the conflict and stress of the relationship with the father. Likewise, it's not always a person involved in these triangles. Sometimes it's an entity. So you might have the same situation of a mother and father in conflict, and in this case, the husband will gravitate towards work, and he will stay at work, and the work will become the third side of this triangle because he finds work enjoyable, less stressful, whereas his relationship with his wife is full of conflict and stress, and so he will move closer to work while staying away from home to avoid that stress. Often we'll find these triangles are moving fluidly as new dimensions of relationships open up, and that which was close turns into conflict and stress, and in that case they may turn back to the one that was originally pushed to the outside for help. So if the relationship with the child becomes difficult, the mother may turn to the father and try to bring them in to help deal with that stressful situation. So you have this idea of fluid triangles, that when there's conflict and stress in a family between two, they will always incorporate either a third person or entity to avoid the stressful situation and find comfort in something that is easier. Another important concept in his system of family psychiatry and trying to bring harmony to families is this idea of differentiation of self. And this was actually the aim and the goal of all of his work, was to try to get people to be more independent in their thoughts and in their emotions, that if there was very little differentiation between members of a family in the way they thought and felt, there was a great deal of uniformity among them, he felt that was not healthy, that they were basically working to please one another and to maintain the same thoughts and the same emotions at all time and at all costs. And he wanted to move people towards having a healthy sense of self, thinking their own thoughts, feeling their own emotions, and realized that this was not the ultimate goal in complete differentiation of self, so that there would be no relationship in the family, but that there would be a healthy form of differentiation of self, so that I would be my own person, I wouldn't worry so much about what other people's thought, and then I could move towards other family members in a normal, healthy relationship instead of a dependent one where I was constantly concerned about what others thought about me and what I thought about them, and pushing for this uniformity and conformity of thought and emotion. And then finally, when this was not going well, the differentiation of self, another concept he incorporated was emotional cutoff. And in this case, what you would have is a situation where someone was uncomfortable, was not able to differentiate themselves, have their own thoughts, their own emotions. They entered a very stressful phase in the relationship. And what they do then to deal with it is not deal with it. They cut off their emotions, they stop talking about it, they divert conversations away from that which is uncomfortable. They never bring it up and deal with it. It gets buried and pushed aside. Everyone knows it's there, but no one wants to deal with it. And he hoped by working with families that as they could increase this, then this would diminish and could be worked on. And sometimes he used these triangles. Move towards a family member, perhaps that has a stronger differentiation of self, that's easier to deal with, and then the two of you can then turn and help deal with this. Instead of just cutting off your emotions and refusing to deal with it, you then can go to the family and begin to talk in a healthy, rational way about the problems and find resolution to them. As I say, he was a pioneer in many ways in this field and had very good insights, among these being triangles, differentiation of self, and emotional cutoff.
There are several different types of depression. I've got a number of them listed on the board here. The distinguishing features are the symptoms, the severity of the symptoms, and the duration of how long they last. Three of them that are categorized by the DSM, which is the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders, an American Psychiatric Association publication. Three of those are the major depressive disorder, dysthymic disorder, and manic depression. Major depressive disorder, also known as major depression or clinical depression, has symptoms that last for most of the day, nearly every day, for at least 2 weeks. And it must have a number of additional symptoms such as significant weight loss, difficulty in sleeping, difficulty thinking, excessive feelings of guilt. Dysthymic disorder refers to a nearly constant depressed mood for at least 2 years, with additional symptoms such as eating problems, sleeping problems, low energy, fatigue, low self-esteem. Manic depression includes periods of mania and depression, and there's a cycling between these two states that is an identifying mark of this type of depression. There's manic episodes where there's inflated self-esteem, decreased need for sleep, easily distracted. Someone that's more talkative than usual characterizes this type of depression. Other types of depression, you have postpartum depression. This is very common in women after they give birth, usually beginning within 4 weeks of giving birth and varying in duration and severity. Seasonal affective disorder, also known as SAD, is a type of depressive disorder that reoccurs at a specific time of the year. Seasonal is the key word there. Typically, this would be in the fall or winter, which can be drearier months of the year. And anxiety depression is not an official depression type as defined by the DSM, but anxiety is often occurring at the same time as depression with someone, and a depressed individual that exhibits lots of anxious symptoms may be diagnosed with this. Atypical depression, which is a subtype of the major depressive disorder, is characterized by a temporary improvement in mood in reaction to positive events, in addition with other symptoms such as weight gain, oversleeping, a heavy feeling in arms and legs, and a sensitivity to rejection. Chronic depression is a major depressive episode that lasts for at least 2 years. Here we've got double depression, which is someone that has dysthymia, which is chronic mild depression, and also experiences a major depressive episode, more severe depressive symptoms lasting at least 2 weeks. Endogenous depression. Endogenous means from within the body, and this type of depression is defined as feeling depressed for no apparent reason. So there's not an external thing, it's considered to be endogenous. Situational or reactive depression, also known as adjustment disorder with depressed mood. This develops in response to a particularly stressful situation or when someone is reacting to something, typically a relationship, problems at work or school. It does not meet the criteria for a major depressive disorder, and it's something that, as given the name, it is situational. Agitated depression is a kind of major depressive disorder characterized with physical, emotional restlessness, irritability, and insomnia, and is the opposite, which is the opposite of many depressed individuals who have low energy and feel slowed down physically or mentally. Psychotic depression is a major depressive episode with psychotic symptoms such as hallucinations or delusions. Melancholic depression involves a loss of pleasure in virtually all activities or mood, and mood does not temporarily improve in response to a positive event. So if something good happens to the person, you think they should be more upbeat. Someone who is suffering from melancholic depression would not experience that. Catatonic depression is another subtype of a major depressive disorder, as many of these are, and is characterized with a loss of voluntary movement, an inability to react to one's environment. You think of someone that's catatonic and they're not responding to an environment or a stimulus, and they have extreme resistance to instructions or suggestions. They may be unwilling to speak. Those would be symptoms of catatonic depression. So as you can see, there's a lot of different forms of depression. You have the 3 major categories here. Many of these fall under a major depressive disorder characterization, and these are all important to understand and to know the differences of what can lead to each of these.
Today I thought it'd be helpful to talk a little bit about validity, in this case testing validity, and when we think about something being valid or the validity of something, we're talking about the effectiveness or the accuracy of something. Accuracy and effectiveness would both be synonyms for the word validity, valid. And so when we think in terms of testing validity, we need to think of four things, four types of validity in testing. The first is content validity. This is a measure or assessment at how accurate a particular test is for what it's designed to measure. For example, a math test takes no measure of language skills, and that's not a problem because a math test is designed to test math skills or math knowledge. So under content validity, the only thing you're trying to assess or determine is how accurate, how effective is that particular math test at assessing math skills. So you're looking very narrowly at just the topic that the test is designed to cover. The next area of validity that we want to think about is construct. Construct validity. This is a measure that's actually a little more difficult to do because it's much more subjective. In this case, you're testing the effectiveness or the accuracy of an assessment to determine abstract things like leadership skill. How good is this person at leading, or some other subjective abstract concept. A little more difficult, but it's something that's important to be determined so that you can find out whether or not your test is accurate or effective and therefore valid. The third area we want to talk about in testing validity is concurrent. Concurrent validity has to do with determining whether or not your test stacks up to similar tests. How effective, how accurate is our test when compared to similar tests designed to test the same types of things. So we would compare our math test to someone else's math test and therefore come up with the concurrent validity. Content means how well do we determine math skills. Concurrent tells us how well does our math test stack up to other math tests. Is ours effective and accurate and therefore valid when compared to similar tests designed to test the same thing. And then finally, under testing validity, we want to talk about predictive. Predictive validity is the effectiveness or the accuracy of a test to predict future performance. Performance that has not yet happened, but should it happen, how good or how well would the person do based on their work on this particular test. And so the graduate record exam, the GRE, or the Scholastic Aptitude Test, the American College Test, the SAT, and the ACT are predictive tests. The SAT and the ACT are designed to predict how successful someone would be at undergraduate, college level work, and the GRE, of course, is designed to test how well someone might do at graduate level work. And they are examples of predictive tests, and therefore they can be assessed as to their ability to accurately and effectively or validly predict someone's performance at their particular level, either undergraduate or graduate. So when thinking about testing validity, you need to think in these categories. Content, how good is it at determining the skill for the particular area that it's written for. Construct validity has to do with subjective things, abstract things like leadership ability, how good is it at that. Concurrent is we're comparing our test with other similar tests covering the same area. And then predictive, how well are we able to predict someone's future behavior, future success based on how they do on this particular test. This is testing validity, and always keep in mind those words accuracy and effectiveness when looking at these particular categories. In today's video, we're going to go briefly and touch lightly upon Dr. Freud's theory of personality as it relates to the id and the ego and the way they interact. If we want to look at this model, we're talking about a psychological model of the structure of the mind. This does not correspond to places in the brain or to anything about us physiologically. You can't point to a part of the body or the brain and say that's where the id is, and that's where the ego is, and that's where the superego is. This has to do with our mind and Freud's theory about how people live and interact with the world. And he saw three different forces at work within people. He said that we are all born with this basic identity of pleasure seeking, or the id. The id is entirely consumed with self-gratification. If I'm hungry, I want food now. If I am uncomfortable, I want to be made comfortable now. It just wants to meet its needs. It is heedless and regardless of reality going on around it, of other people's needs, of other people's wants, whether it hurts someone else. And Freud would say this is seen most clearly in babies. If they're hungry, they cry. They get fed, they stop crying. If they have a dirty diaper, they cry. If they get changed and are made physically comfortable, they stop crying. If they're sleepy, they cry, and you put them to sleep, they stop crying. So it's whatever they need immediately, that's the id. This is the innate, born into us, selfish nature that says, I want what I want, and I want it now. It's the aggressive part of us, the pleasure-seeking part of us. It's all of our basic drives, hunger, sex, aggression, whatever. All those basic drives come out and are part of the id, and this is from birth. Then Freud said, around about the age 3, the ego starts to develop, and it's the ego's job to satisfy as much as possible the desires of the id while taking into account the reality around it. So by 3, the child is starting to realize that there are other people who also have wants, desires, and needs. It is also starting to realize that if it immediately tries to gratify itself, sometimes that leads to pain. And in order to maximize pain, the ego develops to satisfy the needs of the id while taking into account reality, other people's, other needs, other wants, and the best way, given the current state of affairs, the current reality, to prolong pleasure and to minimize pain. So the ego develops to moderate the id, but also to more adequately and over the long haul satisfy the id. So the ego's job, once again, is to meet the needs of the id. The id says, I want, I want, I want. The ego comes along and says, okay, you want, but here's the reality of the situation. In order for you to get what you want, we're going to have to withhold here, restrain here, pursue this, that, there. And that will lead to long-term pleasure, although it will sometimes hamper short-term gain. And we're going to want to avoid the short-term pleasure seeking, as it may lead to more long-term pain later. And then around about the age 5, Freud said the superego starts to develop. This is the part that we would ordinarily call the conscience. It doesn't deal with the real, but more the ideal, what ought to be, the way things should be. And basically there's this conflict in between the superego, which says this is the way things ought to be based on the morality of society, and the id, which says I want this now, and the ego stands between seeking to rationalize, harmonize, and satisfy both poles. Society says this is the way things ought to be, I want this, here's the way things are right now in reality, how can I keep the superego quiet, keep my conscience placated, and get what I want without long-term hurt based on the reality of the situation now. So the ego is the one who interacts between these opposing forces, but its primary job is to meet the needs of the id, those primal drives of hunger, aggression, intimacy, things like this, to meet those needs, but in a way that deals with reality. So remember, the id is the basic drives. It's based on pleasure, and it wants it now. Pleasure and aggression, basic drives, born with it. The ego is based on the reality principle. This is the way things are really happening right now. This is the current circumstance. How am I going to meet the current circumstance, satisfy the needs of the id, but not produce prolonged pain? So satisfies the id based on reality. And the superego is the conscience and deals not with the real, but with the ideal, the way things ought to be as it is informed by the current culture and society. Born with the id, age 3, the ego starts to develop. Age 5, the superego starts to develop, unless there are hindrances to that development. This is Freud's theory, then, of the interaction of the id and the ego. If you'd like to learn more about this or related matters, underneath this video you'll see a link. If you'll click on that link, it'll take you to the website that has that information. While you're at that website, you'll also find a link to an ebook that's ready for immediate download. Let's think together for a minute about chronic insomnia. I'm not speaking today about occasional insomnia, which everyone suffers from, but chronic, persistent insomnia and some of the reasons and forms that that insomnia takes. And we have some of those on the board behind us. And so for the next few minutes, we're just going to talk about those together. The first form of chronic insomnia I want to go over is psychological insomnia. Psychological chronic insomnia is due to anxiety or fear about the inability to fall asleep. And the fear itself of not being able to fall asleep keeps the patient from falling asleep. And this is so persistent and chronic that it does create problems. It is an issue that needs to be dealt with on a psychological level, but it can cause a great deal of stress to the person who increases in their phobia the more times they are unable to fall asleep, which only exacerbates the situation. Another reason for chronic insomnia is sleep state misperception. In this particular example, someone is in sleep study been recorded to have normal sleep patterns through all 5 states of sleep and a normal duration of time, and yet when asked about their sleep will report that they got no sleep or very little sleep, or that the sleep they did receive was of a poor nature. And even when they're shown the results that you slept a normal amount of time, entered all 5 levels of sleep, will still persist in the belief that they got little or no sleep and that the lab results must be lying to them. Also a difficult psychological situation to deal with as the person has a hard time believing the lab results over their own experience. And it's not entirely understood why this happens, but it is an issue of chronic insomnia where the person is getting plenty of sleep and yet they believe and feel as if they get little to none. Moving on then, other forms of chronic insomnia would be hypnotic dependent sleep disorder. In this case, someone trying to deal with their insomnia has started taking hypnotic drugs. In this case, we would commonly call them sleeping pills, in order to sleep, and has become dependent on them and found that they need to take higher and higher dosages and quantities in order to get the normal amount of sleep. And when they realize that they become dependent on them and they're not working as well as they had in the past, oftentimes their doctor will take them off of them. And what they find when they are completely removed from the person, they are no longer taking the sleeping agents, that the chronic insomnia kicks into high gear and they report a great difficulty in falling asleep, a great deal of irritability and other issues and problems, not only from the lack of sleep, but the inability to sleep because they've come off of the sleeping pills or hypnotic drugs. Another, and the final one we'll talk about under chronic insomnia, is fatal familial insomnia, and this is a genetic disorder. And in this particular form of chronic insomnia, you have a situation where the person is genetically, because of a protein that is tweaked, completely unable. It's a neurological disorder. They are unable to sleep. And of course, this is very damaging to our health, and it is fatal. The average length of time a person from the onset of this particular disorder lives is between 7 and 36 months, 18 months being the average. They go through various stages, the final ones concluding in a type of dementia, an inability to speak. There are lots of disorders associated with this, but there is no known cure for this fatal familial insomnia. It is a neurological disorder that is incurable and always fatal. Well, these are some of just a few of the chronic causes of insomnia that we've talked about today, and I hope you understand them a little better. Today I want to go over just briefly borderline personality disorder. Borderline personality disorder, BPD, also known as emotionally unstable personality disorder. There's some perhaps changes in the works to change the name from borderline personality disorder, as some people feel that it stigmatizes the person suffering from this difficulty. And so one of the suggested possibilities is emotionally unstable personality disorder. Basically, you have someone with BPD who is suffering from an unstable and highly chaotic personality, especially in their mood swings. And usually those mood swings are not associated with circumstances in their life. They're not consistent with the things around them. So they can swing from everything is great to everything is dismal. The world is perfect and now the world is going quickly to destruction. People are either all good or all bad. You are perfect, you are evil. I love you, I hate you. And it's this back and forth pendulum swing that makes it very difficult for those around the person with BPD to relate to them, because there's no way to predict what person you're going to receive. Today you may be the good person who's perfect and great. Tomorrow you may be the most evil person on the planet and they hate you, and there's been no context, no change to make that reasonable or understandable. So basically you've got an unstable, highly chaotic mood swings. You have extreme anger, often is the indicative here, extreme anger with no context to justify the anger. The person is just ballistic with anger and you're trying to figure out why, what happened. Know of a particular case where a family member perhaps had something along these lines, but essentially what would happen is whoever showed up last was the good person. So someone shows up to visit, they're the first person there, well they're good until the second person shows up, and now a switch takes place. The first person who arrived is now the bad person, and the new person who arrived is now the good person. And so this person with the difficulty would say, oh good, you're here to help me, they're trying to kill me. And then a third person would come. Now those two are in a conspiracy to kill them, and that person is now the good person. And there's no rhyme or reason to it in many ways. It's just this quick transference, this black and white thinking about people without real proper context to it. So extreme outbursts of anger with no proper context, extremely unpredictable, and often this idea of splitting is there, this all or nothing thinking, black and white thinking, mostly as it relates to people, how they are perceived and judged. So one minute the person that's trying to help them is there to save them, and they'll say things like, I love you and you're here to rescue me and I just can't live without you. But then suddenly, because they can't draw a clear line between their identity and this person that now they suddenly love's identity, they get afraid. And to deal with the anxiety and to create distance, they don't move just a little bit down the scale. They run all the way to the other end of the scale and they say, no, you're here to kill me, aren't you? You hate me. And so now they're suddenly in the bad area, and then sometimes it'll cycle back. No, I can't think about that if they're bad, and we have this relationship, then maybe I'm bad, and I don't want to be bad, so no, they're good now. And it goes around and around and around. This idea of splitting is there. When we think in terms of treatment for people with BPD, one of the most important things to remember is to maintain control, self-control in the situation, and don't get upset by anything that the patient says or does. So the person who has this, you know that they don't have a lot of control, that this is what you're in store for, and as you go to work with them, they're going to say and do things that ordinarily from other people on the street would be highly inflammatory and aggressive and upsetting. You must maintain control and not get upset about anything they say or anything they do, realizing that this is part of what they're struggling with and you're there to help them. Next, you need to establish rules and guidelines, clear rules and guidelines. We're going to work together, and here's behavior I will not accept and things I will not accept, and here are the consequences if you breach these rules and guidelines. And so establish the rules and guidelines, spell them out clearly, and then spell out your expectations. I expect you to talk to me and to sit here quietly and to behave in this particular form or fashion, and then be firm. Once you've established the expectations, establish the rules and guidelines, be firm. Don't be harsh, but be firm. The person will probably try to test, is this really what you mean? And as long as you back it up kindly but firmly, often they'll get the point. Remember, you're still dealing with someone who, at least in their emotions, is highly chaotic, and yet they understand these sorts of things. So you maintain control, you establish rules and guidelines, you spell out the expectations, you're firm with those, and then you want to set a consistent schedule. Consistent scheduling actually helps in the process. Okay, we're going to meet every other day at 3, and so every other day at 3 you've got to be there. They kind of count on that sort of regularity assists them. And then finally, when they do make progress, when they do keep within the bounds of the expectations, the rules and the guidelines, reward them and give them positive reinforcement. Rewards and positive reinforcement go a long way towards helping them. It takes time, but they can be helped. So this has just been a cursory overview of some of the things related to borderline personality disorder. One, the possible name change to emotionally unstable personality disorder, the unpredictable nature of it, the idea of splitting, all or nothing thinking, you're either all good or you're all bad, and then some of the treatment overview here that can be very beneficial and helpful. If you'd like to learn more about this and related topics, underneath this video you'll see a link. If you'll click on that link, it'll take you to the website with that information. And while you're at that website, you should find a link to an ebook that's ready for immediate download. I want to take the next few minutes just to talk briefly a little bit about addiction and crack cocaine. We're going to go over what crack cocaine is, some of the effects it has on users, and how that relates to addictive patterns. So we'll begin by just describing what crack cocaine is. Crack cocaine begins as cocaine powder that is then combined with common household products and heated and cooked. And through that process, it forms crystalline chunks. These are solid chunks. And because of the sound that it makes as that process is happening of cooking the powder, mixing them with these household products, it often cracks apart and makes this noise. So it's part of the reason why it gets the name that it does. So cocaine powder mixed with common household products, cooked together to create solid chunks, crystalline form. And then this result, this solid chunk, is placed in a pipe and ignited, and the vapors are inhaled directly into the lungs. It is essentially smoked. The inhaled vapors produce an almost immediate whole body euphoria. You just feel from head to toe, it has been described as a whole body orgasm. So almost immediate high, whole body euphoria. It creates increased energy. It has a profound effect upon the body. The problem comes that when that high then comes to an end, when the chemical then is processed and removed from the body, what has typically been called the crash follows. And at this point, the person goes from whole body euphoria to deep feelings of depression, anxiety, paranoia, and fatigue. And of course, a strong desire then is built up to reacquire that sense of whole body euphoria and reacquire the drug in order to produce that feeling and to get rid of the feelings of anxiety, paranoia, and fatigue. So this pattern obviously builds on itself, which is why we talk about addiction here, that the addiction builds not only physically and chemically, that the body needs the material, but the person psychologically wants that feeling of whole body euphoria and wants to get rid of the feelings of anxiety, paranoia, and fatigue and depression. So there is this psychological as well as physiological need created for the substance. Therefore, it is highly addictive. When we talk about levels of use and how much is ingested, it creates different effects. So low levels of crack produced an increased heart rate, increased temperature, and increased energy, and decreased appetite. So not as hungry, increased heart rate, temperature, and energy. It also produces, along with this, constipation, insomnia, impotence, and weight loss. Because of this right here, just at the lowest levels, because of the elevated heart rate and temperature, elevated energy, decreased appetite, and depletion of the body of fluids, once again due to the increased temperature and other things like this, it produces the side effects of constipation, insomnia, impotence, and weight loss. Now, as the amount goes up that is consumed, it starts producing other effects, which of course are much more negative to the body. Things like convulsions, nausea, twitching, seizures, stroke, respiratory and heart failure, and ultimately death can ensue as the quantity ingested goes up. So crack cocaine, once again, a product of cocaine powder mixed with common household products to produce this hard rock-like substance that is then ignited, the vapors inhaled. The reason it's done is because of the almost instantaneous whole body euphoria, and the addiction comes in not only because of the substance itself is highly addictive physiologically, but psychologically. When the person comes off the high, they are almost immediately assaulted by feelings of depression, anxiety, paranoia, and fatigue, and in order to get rid of those feelings, they seek once again to find this substance to replace those negative feelings with the positive euphoria that they had before. It's a very dangerous substance, not only because of the short-term effects with the elevated heart rate, temperature, and energy, decreased appetite, producing some of these minor situations of constipation, insomnia, impotence, and weight loss, but the long-term effects as people increase the dosage and increase the amount that they're taking, leading to these horrible consequences of convulsions, nausea, twitching, seizures, stroke, and then finally breathing and heart failure, and ultimately death. It is a highly addictive substance, both physiologically and psychologically, and help is definitely needed if someone is using crack cocaine. If you'd like to learn more about this, and things related to it. Beneath this video, there's a link. If you'll click on it, it'll take you to the website with that information. And while you're there, you'll also find a link to an ebook that's ready for immediate download. Those that are tasked with helping people make productive changes to their life, dealing with the pain and the stress and the hurt of dysfunctional life, have various approaches to, one, identifying problems, and two, finding a solution to those problems. One of the ways to both identify and help solve problems is the psychoanalytic approach. The psychoanalytic approach is also called the psychodynamic intervention approach, and it basically follows the following tenets. Just briefly, I want to just talk about the few feeder views that feed into this view so that you have maybe a broader idea of where it comes from. So the psychoanalytic or psychodynamic intervention approach draws upon psychoanalytic theory, ego psychology theory, psychosocial theory, and object relations theory. So all of those things are drawn together and coalesce in this psychoanalytic approach. The key tenets that we want to talk about is, number one, the social environment in which the person exists is considered the primary external influence. Nothing is greater as an influence externally to the person than their social environment. So you must know the environment in which they're in and get all the information you can there to realize what external factors are feeding into the equation and causing the dysfunction and the problems. Second, behavior, how people act, flows from the unconscious mind and unconscious drive. So in many ways, they don't know why they're doing what they're doing. It's flowing out of the unconscious mind, drives, motives, and those sorts of things. But their behavior flows out of that. So you've got the external factors of the social environment, and then internally, these unknown motives and drives from the unconscious mind. Next, dysfunction comes about by the stress produced through conflicts in the unconscious mind. So stress-producing experience and conflicts in the unconscious mind express themselves in dysfunctional behavior. So you've got the external influences of the social environment, you've got motives and drives coming from the unconscious mind producing behavior. Dysfunctional behavior shows that there is stressful conditions, that there is conflict-causing experiences in the unconscious mind then being acted out in dysfunctional behavior. Finally, if you're going to get resolution to this, what you have to do is draw out the unconscious mind into the conscious mind. What's going on with them in places they don't know subconsciously, drawing that out into the open, into the conscious mind. By doing that, you actually produce stress. The reason it's in the unconscious mind is because they don't want to deal with it. And in some ways, the stress and the conflict has pushed it there. You draw it out, and you use the energy created from the stress and the conflict as it comes into the conscious mind to help produce changes. So you would talk them through it and say, look, I know this is painful, I know this is hard, let's do something about it. Let's actually use that energy productively to bring about a good change in your behavior, changes in your thoughts, changes in your behavior, changes in your environment so that things start moving in a good direction. So the key factors to remember here again in the psychoanalytic approach is that the primary external influence is always the social environment. All of our behavior flows from motives and drives found in our unconscious mind. Dysfunctional behavior is produced by stress-producing experiences and conflict in the unconscious mind, and the way to help alleviate that or change that or bring about good is to take the things that are in the unconscious mind, bring them forth into the conscious mind. It's stress-producing to do that, but then you help them use that energy from that stress to redirect them and promote positive changes in their life and their behavior. If you'd like to learn more about this, you can click on the link underneath this video. That link will take you to a website with that information, and also on that website, you'll find there a link to an ebook that's ready for immediate download. In conducting social work with specific ethnic groups, there are several things that need to be kept in mind in order to provide the best care for that person in need. So when we think about social work with a specific ethnic group, the first thing we need to be aware of is the most up-to-date code of ethics for whatever agency you happen to be serving at the time. What is their code of ethics? Am I aware of it? Am I abiding by it? Am I consistent with it? So you need that information to begin with so that you are providing ethical care and ethical help within the confines of the group that you are serving. So you must have the knowledge of the most up-to-date code of ethics as they pertain to the distribution of services to specific groups. Next, if you're doing social work with anybody, but with specific ethnic groups as well, you need to be aware of not only the typical human responses to stress, but also perhaps specific responses of specific ethnic groups related to stress. What are those typical responses of every human being, and then perhaps the specific responses of a particular ethnic group to stress? To be aware of those so that you know what to expect based on not only the general population, but the specific group that you're seeking to help. Next, you need to be aware of the policies and services offered by your agency. So whatever agency you're serving, what are its policies and related to providing help for this ethnic group? What are the services offered to this particular ethnic group? You need to be aware of everything that's at your disposal, not only within your agency, but in other agencies that may be connected to it, so that you know the whole range of things that are available. So being aware of and knowledgeable of the policies and the services offered is critical. So you've got generic background information, code of ethics, typical human responses and specific responses to that ethnic group, policies and services offered, and then you need to have personal awareness. What is my ethnic background, and how is the way I was raised and my own thoughts and feelings, not only towards my own ethnicity, but to other ethnicities, going to come into play as I seek to provide help and care. So self-awareness is critical as well. Self-assessment might lead you to say, perhaps this is better done by someone else and I need to take some time to work on myself here, get myself in a position where I can provide the best possible care to people. Through our own upbringing and other things, prejudices sometimes can be there, perhaps dormant, and they suddenly come to the surface. They definitely need to be dealt with. So along with the background information, you need to be aware of yourself as well, and your own upbringing and how your own ethnicity plays into how you help others. Then, next, do a realistic assessment of the social environment in which the problem has arisen. A realistic assessment. We want to emphasize that word there, realistic assessment. I know we all want to think the best, and sometimes we look at a situation and say it's the worst. Make a realistic assessment of the circumstances and situation that has led to the need for the intervention or the help. So you've taken a look then at the environment specific to the client, and you therefore are able to facilitate a proper resolution to the problem. So you're going to get a proper resolution to the problem by having a realistic assessment of the social environment related to that particular person that you're seeking to help. 6, you need to look at the root causes of why there is going to be participation in the intervention, and is the person participating voluntarily or involuntarily in the services offered. So what has led to this intervention, and is the person participating voluntarily or involuntarily? Those are critical things to be aware of because it will affect the way you try to provide the help and what you're able to do, and perhaps it broadens or limits your options, and especially if there's an involuntary participation. So what led to the intervention, and is the person participating voluntarily or involuntarily? And then finally, number 7, identify the stresses and supports unique to that ethnic group that you're seeking to help. So what are the stresses unique to that ethnic group, but what are the supports perhaps that are also unique to that ethnic group? And be willing to be an advocate, not just for one group, but for all those in the community that are needing the support and help that is provided by the agency that you are serving. So these are just basically 7 things to be aware of, 7 elements, if you will, that prepare the worker to work with specific ethnic groups, but they're obviously applicable across the board as well. But if you're going to work with a specific ethnic group, be aware of the background situations, be aware of yourself, make a realistic assessment of the social environment. Why was the intervention called for? Is the person or group participating voluntarily or involuntarily? And then finally, what are the stresses and supports unique to that group? And be willing to be an advocate for all those involved in the area. Anyway, if you'd like to learn more about this or related things, underneath this video you'll find a link. If you'll click on that link, it'll take you to the website with that information. And while you're on that website, you'll also find a link to an ebook that's ready for immediate download. Wanted to go over some of the concepts that are critical to counseling. These are by no means all the concepts that you need in counseling, but they are important factors when we think about the effectiveness of counseling. And I want to go over the 4 that are on the board and talk about them briefly. So the first concept in counseling that we want to talk about is attending. Attending refers to the counselor's verbal and nonverbal communication with the client. This basically is nodding of the head, a smile, subvocalizations, including words, please continue, things like this. Any sort of audible or visual communication to the client by the counselor that indicates that the counselor is attending to what the client is saying. This is very important because if the counselor gives no indication to the client of paying attention, then the client tends to lose hope that you don't really care, no one cares, this isn't doing me any good. And so it's important that one of the most important concepts for the counselor to communicate to the client is, I am attending to your words, I am engaged in what you're saying, I am interested, so that they might feel at ease, comfortable, and be drawn out to give further disclosure. So attending is a very critical and important concept in counseling. Once again, it's both visual, nodding of the head, smiles, and auditory, subvocalizations, that's interesting, words, continue, I understand, things like this. Verbal and nonverbal communication that get the client to communicate further. The second concept we want to go over is immediacy. Immediacy. This concept refers to things that as the client is opening up and talking, something may be brought up in the conversation that the counselor needs to key in on immediately, right away, stop everything else and deal with that situation that's come up. And you've got to be listening and attending to know when those things come up and be able to recognize them so that when the issue is brought forward, you immediately stop everything else and deal with that issue. It's that critical. It's that important. There are some things that may seem tangential or insignificant to the client as they bring them up, but if the counselor keys in on that and says that is really critical, and even if it seems superfluous on the outside, on the perimeter of what the client's really trying to deal with, the counselor needs to immediately stop the client and deal and focus in on that particular issue. So immediacy, knowing what's important and being willing to stop the client where they are and deal solely with that particular issue of critical importance instead of putting it off till later. Immediacy. And then next we want to look at expertness. Expertness. In this counseling concept, what we're trying to say here is that the counselor needs to know what they are competent to deal with and what they're not competent to deal with. If they are competent to deal with something, they should say so and do it with confidence. They should not, however, pretend or act as if they can help someone out of sympathy or tenderness of heart when they really have no idea how to help the person. If it were to come to light by the client, from the counselor, that they really don't know what they're doing, this completely undermines the whole process and keeps the client from feeling any sort of confidence that they can get the help they need. So know what you know and also know what you don't know. And be willing to say, I don't know, but I will help find someone for you that can help you deal with that problem. I know you're tender-hearted, but to say, I really want to help this person, I don't know how to, but I'll act like I know how to, really just hurts them in the long run. Get them to someone who really knows how to help with that particular situation. That's the best thing you can do. So know what you know what you don't know. Don't pretend to know something you don't know in order to help someone. Be an expert in your field, pass someone off to other experts in their field when something comes up. And then finally, evaluating. And this is one of the most important concepts for a counselor. You want to be helping people, but if you're not evaluating, you don't know whether you're providing help or not. And so you need to, from time to time, both by yourself and perhaps with the client as well, spend some time evaluating whether or not progress is being made, whether or not the help that is needed is being brought to bear. So basically, in this case, it is the counselor's appraisal of the counseling process. And then that may include feedback from the client. If it looks as if no progress is being made, then you may need to look elsewhere or even refer them on to someone else. But without that evaluation, neither one of you, the client nor the counselor, will know if you're really making forward progress. It can be slow progress, that's fine. But if no progress is being made, because the evaluation determines that, something else needs to be tried, you need to move on. So these are 4 critical counseling concepts that you need to know. There are obviously more concepts that are important in their own right related to counseling. But remember, attending, both the visual and auditory clues that I am clued into what you're saying. I'm listening, I'm with you. Immediacy, stopping, breaking in when something critical comes up. Expertness, know what you don't know. And then evaluating, which is taking time to appraise, is this really helpful or not? If you'd like to look at this and learn more or other concepts related to this, underneath this video there's a link. Click on it, it'll take you to a website with that information, and while you're there, you'll find another link to an ebook that's ready for immediate download.